Our scripture for this evening is a very comforting and affirming one. It is often even read at memorials and funeral services. The text comes from 5 chapters in the book of John that are known as the farewell discourse of Jesus. If you knew that you would be leaving everyone that you know behind you, what would you say to your closest community? This is part of Jesus' message to the disciples once he was aware of his imminent arrest and possible death. He says to them, "I will not leave you orphaned. God will provide you another friend so that you will always have someone with you." 2 Thursdays ago, I was driving home from St. Paul's Cathedral. I just attended a listening session on immigration and refugees, and I texted Dana to let her know that I was on my way home. I was about to turn onto the highway when I rounded the corner and saw a car on the side of the road with a flat tire. There was a black man all alone with his legs sticking out from underneath the car. His torso was under the car, trying to set the jack up to change the tire. Cars were turning onto this one-way road from both sides. He looked so vulnerable in more ways than one. I pulled over and walked to the car and asked if he needed any help, knowing full well that I probably sucked when it comes to changing a tire. He politely declined and said that he should be okay. I responded, "Well, you're in a vulnerable position right now, so I'm just going to stand here while you work on that tire." I stood in front of him on the road so that the cars turning the corner would see me standing, whereas they might not see someone who was lying down. The man didn't have the right size of jack for his car, so he struggled with making it work. After a lot of physical force, he was able to get the car up on the jack and get the flat tire off of the rim. It started to rain, and he didn't want me to get wet. I replied, "No worries," and I got my big umbrella from my car to hold over the both of us while he continued to work. When it looked like he was almost done putting the spare tire on, I said, "Do you know why I really stopped? In this day and age, I don't want any black man to be alone on the street without a witness or support." He looked in my eyes and said, "Thank you. It's been a long day and I just got off work and all I want to do is get home." He went back to trying to get the jack out from underneath the car since it had been lowered down. But the jack got stuck. He pulled and yanked and tried, but the jack would not budge. I could sense this man's stress and exhaustion. Not knowing much about cars, I innocently suggested, "Well, why don't you lift the car up and I'll get under there and I'll get the jack out." Apparently this was the funniest suggestion he could imagine. He lost it in laughter. He looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, but..." And then he proceeded to laugh for a good minute at the ridiculousness of my suggestion. I was happy to be able to provide some comic relief for this stressed out man, so I continued, "Okay, I'll lift up the car and you pull out the jack." He laughed some more and stood up. Then he positioned his hands on the car in order to try to lift it up. I said, "Wait at least until I get under the car." I got underneath. He lifted up the car, and I pulled out the jack in 1 second flat. In disbelief, he said, "Huh," with a big smile on his face. My phone started to ring. He thanked me, we shook hands, I wished him well. Dana was calling me. I said, "Oh, it's my wife, I gotta go," and I ran off. I will not leave you orphaned. God will provide you another friend so that you will always have someone with you. I was blessed to have lunch this week with Sarah Cunningham, one of the Oklahoma City women heavily involved in free mom hugs. She just got back from a 3-week trek to and from the famous Stonewall Inn in New York City. Her goal was to arrive there at the historic beginning site of our modern-day LGBT rights movement on Mother's Day, and to hug as many LGBT folk whose own mothers might not have hugged them in a while or ever again since they came out of the closet. We're so blessed that Sarah is going to be able to share her own testimony and witness with us in worship on June 11th. She brought tears to my eyes again and again as she recounted the impact and the hugs and the transformation that she experienced on this trip. I will not leave you orphaned. God will provide you another friend so that you will always have someone with you. Many of you probably saw my Facebook post midweek about being able to visit a young man in jail on Wednesday. A man incarcerated found out about our churches via a newspaper article, and he longs for a spiritual community that will be accepting of him and his gay identity. I brought a bag of LGBT books to the jail, but learned that I could not give them to him directly. I could donate the books, and then they would be placed on the library cart, and then all the inmates would have access to that literature. I could only donate the paperback books, and did so. I talked with the man through a television screen attached to a phone for our allotted 15 minutes. I let him know that we have 2 amazing churches that care about him. He cried and said I could place his name on our prayer lists. He asked me if I would call his parents for him. I promised to do so and prayed with him during our last minute on the phone. The next day, I talked with his father, who was pleased to know that his son had reached out to us and that we cared enough to provide love and support to his son, who was going through such a rough time. So even when your own parents have not abandoned you, but you still find yourself in a situation isolated from society, Jesus promises, I will not leave you orphaned. God will provide you another friend so that you will always have someone with you. Reverend Scott Jones, one of my predecessors here at Cathedral of Hope, attended the Festival of Homiletics this week, an annual event drawing more than 1,800 preachers. This is a festival exhibiting the finest of preachers and teachers so that others can learn about worship that is dynamic, nurturing, and prophetic. I read Scott Jones's blogs this week about his experience on site. He attended a presentation on preaching by the famous Reverend Will Willimon, a bishop in the United Methodist Church. On Thursday, he posted the following about that lecture. Willimon said that sometime in the middle of his career, it became fashionable to view pastoral care as a primary aspect of ministry and to let it trump preaching. He said, if you like holding hands, go into nursing. We are called to be preachers, to tell the truth. His lecture was on using preaching to combat racism. He said one of God's weapons for defeating the color line is preaching. If our congregations are nervous about this kind of talk, then they've just got to get over it. He shared how recently someone came up after he preached and said that he shouldn't have dealt with some issue in his preaching. Willimon responded, the point of the sermon is to increase stress. It's time to talk about our social mores, our social norms, which are an offense against God. On Tuesday night, the non-guilty verdict in the Terrence Crutcher case was announced. Once again, a police officer had killed an unarmed black man. One time and again, so many officers are able to confront armed and unarmed white folk without shooting or killing them. In an interview released the day after the jury's decision, one of the 12 jurors told the press that the jury penned a letter to Chief Chuck Jordan in Tulsa, saying that they believe Officer Shelby should never again be a patrol officer. This juror said that the jury felt that the state's prosecution was, quote, shoddy, and that they could have gotten a conviction, quote, had they done a better job. He said there were so many holes in their case. At one point, I talked with another juror about hanging the jury and making the state try the case again. I'll always feel like a coward for not doing that, end quote. What does it say if even one of the 12 jurors speaks out the very next day, declaring that he doesn't believe that justice was served? If you don't have many black or brown folks as Facebook friends, you might not have seen what I saw the night the verdict was announced. I have watched time and again the responses and reactions after each non-guilty verdict across the United States. As one might expect, there was outcry, anger, grief, fear for oneself and one's family members. But this time it felt different. Maybe because the verdict was in our home state of Oklahoma. Maybe because it came out of Tulsa, where 96 years ago, in what is considered one of the worst incidents in racial violence in the whole history of the United States, a white mob killed close to 300 people, destroying more than 35 blocks of the wealthiest black community in the nation, leaving 10,000 blacks homeless. Witnesses testified that the policemen had joined the mob and that the National Guardsmen had fired a machine gun into the black community. And a dozen or so private planes dropped burning balls of turpentine on rooftops in the black neighborhood. The result was that more than 6,000 black residents were arrested and detained, many for several days. And then everyone went silent about this injustice for decades. So Tulsa seethes with the underpinnings of racial injustice. On Wednesday night, when Officer Shelby was found not guilty, these were the responses I saw from my black and brown friends on Facebook. I quit. Stop killing us. Save our children. My prayer is that I am not consumed by the very hate that I hate. You know what I want to see? I want to see a non-person of color organize a protest, rally, demonstration in response to an officer getting away with murder. These were the responses on my Facebook feed. Because it seems that our state and nation can't just deal with one catastrophe at a time, on Thursday I made my way to the Capitol twice to advocate for a way to raise our state budget that does not do so on the backs of poor and working class folk. On my way home from the Capitol, trying not to get caught in those storms, I instead got caught in standstill traffic. I'd seen earlier online that many were sharing the 30-minute video from the Terrence Crutcher press conference in Tulsa that had aired earlier live that morning. I played the video and listened to the conference while waiting in my car. A pastor whose name I could not catch spoke while the family and clergy from all over Tulsa and Oklahoma stood behind him in support. He said he was there to acknowledge the family in their time of grief, need, and hurt. He said, "We will not be combative or corrosive, but we will be confrontive." He said the absence of violence does not suggest the presence of peace. Our case is not rested. They thought they could bury Terrence Crutcher, but they didn't know he was a seed. He said, in the end, we will not remember the criticisms of our enemies with the silence of our friends. On Friday, because I didn't have anything else to do, I responded to the request from a white ally who felt the call to organize a rally and direct action in response to justice yet again denied for our black and brown community. In a matter of a few hours, we organized a rally and march that would occur only 24 hours later. I spoke on the phone at length with the police department, letting them know of our plans in order to provide transparency and build trust. My phone call with the police officer mirrored most interactions I've ever had with the police. The conversation was pleasant, helpful, supportive, and kind, which actually serves to make a point. I have come to expect this to be the norm for my limited interactions with law enforcement. I am stopped far less frequently than my African American friends, and that's not because I break the law less. To be honest, I probably break the law more, but I don't get pulled over for my infractions. I've never witnessed or heard an African American describe their norm of interactions with the police as pleasant, helpful, supportive, or kind, which is why I pulled over the other day to help a man with a flat tire, which is why I helped to organize a rally and demonstration. It was the first one I had ever been a co-organizer of. So for this rally, I got all the kickback. I had to deal with all the stress and name-calling and backlash that our brown and black organizers are hit with every single time. But I had Jesus' words ringing in my ears. I will not leave you orphaned. God will provide a friend so that you will always have someone